I am Samuel Whitaker, 72 years old, widower, builder of a family I thought would last longer than concrete and steel. 2 weeks ago, I buried my wife. 45 years of marriage laid into the ground with her, and with that burial, I thought grief would be my hardest burden. I was wrong. Grief cuts deep, yes, but betrayal cuts deeper. You would think that in those hushed days after a funeral, the air would still carry respect, that family would lean in close and hold each other together. Instead, I found myself seated at my own dining table, the same table where I carve Sunday roasts and watch my grandchildren grow. Surrounded not by love, but by wolves dressed as kin. The house smelled of lilies and old candle wax. Platters of untouched food still littered the sideboard, leftovers from the reception after the service. My wife had always said that food brings comfort in grief. That night it only brought silence, heavy and suffocating. My eldest son, Richard, cleared his throat. He wore the dark suit he had chosen for the funeral, but the grief was gone from his face. His eyes gleamed with a different hunger. In his hands he held a folder of papers, thick and ominous. He placed it on the table with a thud that echoed like a gavel. His wife, Carla, sat beside him. If grief had ever touched her, it did not show. Her lips curved in a thin smile, the kind you'd expect from a banker closing a deal, not from a daughter-in-law looking at her husband's grieving father. "Dad," Richard began, voice smooth but rehearsed. "We've all been worried about you. You've been forgetting things, losing track of time. Everyone can see it. It's time you let us take responsibility." He slid the folder across the table until it rested in front of me. I did not open it. I already knew what it was. Carla reached out with her manicured fingers and tapped the cover gently, as if coaxing a child. "It's guardianship paperwork," she said, her tone sugar-laced with venom. "Just sign, and everything will be easier. We'll handle the company accounts, the house, your health care. You won't have to worry about a thing." Her eyes glittered. "You'll be free." The word free struck me like a slap. Free from the company I built with my own hands. Free from the land I inherited from my father and preserved all these years. Free from the home where I carried my wife across the threshold. They weren't freeing me. They were stripping me. Around the table, my younger son Michael sat with his gaze fixed on the floor, ashamed but silent. My grandson Ethan, barely 20, leaned back in his chair, scrolling on his phone, barely disguising his impatience. Not one of them looked at me as if I were their blood, their patriarch, the man who had sacrificed for them. To them, I was an obstacle, an old relic cluttering the hallway of their ambitions. Carla leaned forward, lowering her voice to a patronizing whisper that carried across the room. "Samuel, you're not yourself anymore. Everyone knows it. You forget names, you repeat stories, you can't keep track of your own bills. It's cruel to let you continue like this." She reached for a pen and placed it on the folder. "Please, sign. Let us take care of you." I sat still, my hands folded in front of me, knuckles pale with age but steady. I looked at the pen, then at each of their faces. Richard shifting in his seat, eager. Michael unable to meet my eyes. Ethan smirking, already dreaming of fast cars and easy money. Carla, poised, confident, certain of her victory. They thought they had broken me. They thought the loss of my wife had hollowed me into compliance. I opened my mouth, and when I spoke, my voice was quiet, almost fragile. "So, you think I'm senile?" Carla's smile widened. "We don't think, Samuel. We know. You've been slipping for years. This is best for everyone." Her words fell like ice water on my skin, and for a moment I let them sting. I let the silence linger, heavy, as if her words had pinned me in place. Around me, chairs creaked. Someone exhaled in relief, believing the battle was over before it began. My hand hovered over the pen. I let them watch my trembling fingers descend toward the paper. I heard Carla's breath catch, a tiny gasp of triumph. I let her taste that victory for one heartbeat, then another. But inside me, a storm churned. They did not see it, but I was not broken. I had lived long enough to bury friends, raise sons, weather recessions, and fight off competitors who would have ground me to dust. I had built empires from dirt and sweat. Age does not steal cunning. Age sharpens it. They saw weakness where there was only patience. They mistook grief for surrender. They forgot who I am. I am Samuel Whitaker, and this was my house, my table, my legacy. They thought they had me cornered, but what they didn't know was that I had already laid my trap. I looked up slowly and met Carla's eyes. I smiled, small and weary, the smile of an old man too tired to resist. She mistook it for compliance. She leaned back in her chair, victory radiating from her posture. Richard reached for the papers, ready to flip them open, ready to guide my hand to the signature line. Ethan muttered something about finally getting this over with and shoved his phone into his pocket. The room buzzed with their confidence, their certainty that I was finished. I let them have it. I let them build their tower of arrogance brick by brick. And as they laid the final stone, I whispered inside my own mind the promise I had carved onto my heart the day my wife died. I will protect what is ours. I will not let them strip me of dignity. Not now, not ever. The pen rested beneath my fingers. I pressed it lightly against the paper, enough for the sound of the nib scratching to fill the silence. I heard the collective sigh of relief around the table. Carla's nails drummed against the wood, a steady rhythm of triumph. Richard leaned closer, pointing to the line. Right there, Dad, just sign there. My hand trembled and I let it. Let them see the weakness they craved. Let them think the game was theirs. I drew a single meaningless line across the page. Gasps, murmurs. They thought it was done. They thought the will of Samuel Whitaker had been conquered. But in that moment, as their relief turned to chatter and smug smiles, I lifted my eyes once more. I looked beyond them to the empty chair at the head of the table where my wife used to sit during holidays. I imagined her there, quiet strength radiating from her presence, her eyes narrowing in that subtle way that always meant, be careful. I felt her spirit in the room, urging me not to fold, not to surrender to these jackals wearing the faces of family. My chest swelled with a grief so sharp it cut clean, but beneath it rose resolve, iron hard and unyielding. The line I had drawn on the paper was not my signature. It was bait. They didn't notice, not yet. They were too busy congratulating themselves, too certain in their cruelty. Carla reached across the table and patted my hand as if I were a child. See, that wasn't so hard, she cooed. Now you can rest. We'll handle everything. Her touch burned, not with warmth, but with the condescension of a predator. I pulled my hand away and folded it in my lap. I said nothing. Silence has always been my ally. Let them speak. Let them reveal themselves. The more they talked, the deeper they buried their own graves. I watched their faces, memorized every smirk, every smug glance. One day soon, those same faces would twist with shock when I unveiled the truth I carried. One day soon, they would know that senility was the mask I wore to lure them into underestimating me. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed the hour, its deep notes filling the room. The sound always reminded me of time's slow march, unstoppable and merciless. Tonight, it felt like a countdown. Each chime was a reminder that their time of triumph was short, that their fall was inevitable. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and let my eyelids droop just enough to sell the illusion of fatigue. Maybe you're right, I murmured, letting my voice quiver with age. Maybe I am too old to keep track of everything. Carla's eyes gleamed with victory. Richard placed a firm hand on the folder, claiming it as his own. Michael shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Ethan yawned, already picturing his cut of the spoils. They thought the war was over. What they didn't see was the general still standing, disguised as a defeated old man. The first battle had ended, yes, but the war had only begun. I would not let my wife's memory be tarnished. I would not let decades of labor be sold off like cheap trinkets. I would not let my dignity be stripped by greedy hands. They had made their move. They had underestimated me. And soon, I would show them that the sharpest mind in the room was the one they had called senile. I barely slept that night. Grief was still there, yes, but beneath it something else had taken root. A fire. My house had never felt so unfamiliar. The walls seemed to listen. The portraits of my ancestors stared down at me with quiet judgment. I paced the floor of my study, my wife's shawl draped over the arm of the chair, her scent still lingering. How quickly the family we raised together had turned into predators. My eldest son, Richard, so eager to declare me incompetent, to strip me of the empire I built. Carla, his wife, pulling the strings, feeding him ambition and contempt. And Ethan, my grandson, lounging with arrogance, expecting a fortune he had never earned. Even Michael, my younger son, sat silent, letting cowardice chain his tongue. In that silence, I saw betrayal just as sharp as words. The morning after, I heard them moving about in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, the low murmur of voices. I lingered in the hallway, hidden from sight, and caught fragments of their conversation. Carla's voice carried, as it always did. "He's almost ready to fold," she whispered. "He scribbled on the paper last night. Soon he'll be too tired to resist. Once we file this, it's done." Richard's voice followed, lower, hesitant. "Maybe it's too soon. He just lost Mom." Carla snapped back. "Exactly. He's weak. This is the moment to strike. If we wait, he might get help. He might change the will." Silence followed, then the scrape of a chair. My heart tightened in my chest. They weren't even waiting to bury my wife's memory before carving up what was left of me. Later that day, they gathered in the living room. The curtains were half drawn, letting shafts of afternoon light fall across the table where the paperwork still sat. Richard brought in a notary, a man with a briefcase and the stiff posture of someone paid to pretend neutrality. He introduced himself politely, though his eyes darted around, wary of the tension in the air. Carla stood behind him, hand resting on Richard's shoulder, her smile rehearsed and brittle. "Father," Richard said, voice heavy with feigned concern, "we need to finalize this, for your sake, for the family's stability." The notary opened his briefcase and began arranging documents. His pen gleamed under the light. Carla's eyes flicked toward me like daggers. I sat in my armchair, hands folded, saying nothing. Let them push. Let them reveal themselves further. Carla crouched slightly, lowering her face to mine, as if speaking to a child. "Samuel," she cooed, "we're doing this to protect you. You've made mistakes lately, bills left unpaid, meetings forgotten. What if someone takes advantage of you? Wouldn't it be safer if your own family handled things?" My lips twitched, but I did not smile. I thought of the unpaid bills she referenced. Small oversights, yes, but nothing more than what grief brings to a man who has just buried his wife. They twisted my humanity into evidence against me. That was their game. Paint me feeble, corner me with guilt, then snatch what was mine. Michael finally spoke, voice soft, barely audible. "Dad, maybe it's not such a bad idea. At least you'd have less to worry about." I turned my eyes to him, sharp and piercing, and for the first time in days he met my gaze. His cheeks flushed, and he looked away, shame curling his shoulders. It was then I knew I could not rely on him. Fear had hollowed him out. He would not stand beside me. If I was to fight, I would fight alone. The notary slid a fresh set of papers across the coffee table. The sound of paper on wood was like a guillotine dropping. He pointed to the signature line, his voice steady, mechanical. "Mr. Whitaker, if you sign here, guardianship will transfer to your son, Richard. He will be responsible for your estate, your health care, and any legal matters." I stared at the black ink, at the line where my name was meant to vanish into nothing more than a relic. Carla placed the pen before me again. Her hand brushed mine, the faint scent of her perfume curling around me like smoke. "Do the right thing," she whispered. "Don't fight us. We're your family." Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Family was supposed to be the soil in which loyalty grew, watered by love and sacrifice. Instead, they had salted the earth. My jaw tightened. I picked up the pen, turned it in my hand, let the metal glint in the light. Around the room, they leaned forward. The notary adjusted his glasses. Richard's knee bounced with nervous energy. Carla's smile grew wider, her teeth gleaming. Ethan muttered, "Finally." I let the pen hover above the page, felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me like chains. But I was not broken. I was measuring them, memorizing every smirk, every greedy glance, every word that dripped from their mouths. Their arrogance was my ammunition, and though I looked frail, though my hand shook as it held the pen, I knew what they could not. I had already set in motion a plan that would shatter their scheme. They wanted me to sign away my dignity, my legacy. Instead, I would let them reveal just how monstrous they had become, and then I would turn their cruelty against them. I set the pen down deliberately, not signing. The silence that followed was thick. Carla's smile faltered, her brow furrowing. Richard cleared his throat. "Dad?" His voice carried uncertainty now, a flicker of doubt. I looked at him for a long moment, then leaned back in my chair. "I'm tired," I murmured, my voice thin but steady. "I'll think about it." The notary hesitated, glancing between us, uncertain whether to push further. Carla's eyes flashed with irritation, but she masked it quickly, standing tall, her tone brisk. "Of course, Samuel. Rest. We'll continue tomorrow." She snapped her fingers subtly at Richard, and he nodded, ushering the notary out. The papers remained, heavy on the table, a silent threat. That night, as the house settled into uneasy quiet, I stood before my wife's portrait. Her eyes, captured years ago in paint, seemed to follow me, full of the same patience and warning she had always given. I whispered to her, "They think I'm finished. They think you're gone, and I have no strength left. But they don't know me. They don't know us." My voice cracked, grief threading through the anger, but beneath it was steel. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the small recorder I had hidden weeks earlier, back when I first sensed Carla's schemes. I ran my thumb over its worn surface, the faint click of the play button whispering promises of justice. They thought they were cornering me. In truth, I had been listening all along. The following day, Carla arranged another family meeting. The dining table once again became an arena. She poured wine into crystal glasses as if we were celebrating something, her laughter ringing false in the air. Richard sat stiffly, Michael avoided my eyes, and Ethan scrolled endlessly on his phone. When I entered the room, silence fell. All eyes turned to me. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting them see the tremor in my step, the weight of my years. Let them believe the lie of weakness. I lowered myself into the chair at the head of the table, the chair where my wife once sat beside me, and folded my hands. Carla raised her glass. "To the future," she said, her tone triumphant. Richard clinked his glass against hers. Michael hesitated, then followed suit. Ethan didn't bother to look up. I did not raise mine. I let the toast hang in the air, cold and hollow. Then Carla placed the papers before me once more. "It's time," she said. "Sign, and let's put this unpleasantness behind us." I stared at her, at the gleam in her eyes, and for a brief moment I wondered how my son could not see the poison in the woman he had married. But Richard only nodded, urging me on. Michael remained silent. The walls of the house seemed to lean in, waiting. The air was electric with tension. My fingers brushed the pen again, and I felt the fire inside me flare. They wanted my surrender. What they would get instead was my revenge. Soon. The third day arrived like a storm on the horizon, heavy and inevitable. I woke before dawn, the house silent except for the faint creak of its old bones. My heart was steady, not racing the way it had before. The decision was already made. Today I would end their charade. Today I would stop playing the old fool they believed I was. I shaved slowly, put on the suit my wife had chosen for me years ago, the one I wore for important occasions, and slipped the small recorder into my pocket. It felt heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried in my life, though it weighed almost nothing. By the time I descended the stairs, they were already gathered. Carla, as always, had arranged it. She stood at the head of the table in the dining room, her manicured nails drumming lightly against the polished wood. Richard sat beside her, pale and tense, his eyes darting between me and the papers in front of him. Michael lingered at the far end, his shoulders hunched, looking like a man waiting for a storm he couldn't escape. Ethan sprawled lazily, his phone in hand, muttering curses about poor Wi-Fi. Carla's smile widened as I entered, the smile of a predator who believes the prey has no claws left. "Good morning, Samuel," she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We thought we'd settle everything today. We've all had enough uncertainty. Don't you agree?" I lowered myself into my chair at the head of the table, the same seat where I had presided over family dinners, holidays, celebrations. How different it felt now, the air poisoned by betrayal. I looked at each of them in turn, letting the silence stretch. Finally I spoke, my voice soft, deliberate. "Yes, enough uncertainty. Today, everything will be settled." Carla wasted no time. She slid the papers toward me, tapping the signature line with the tip of her pen. "Then, let's not delay. Sign here, Samuel. Let your sons take care of you. Let us carry the burden." I stared at the pen, at her fingers so eager to close the trap. Then I looked at Richard. "My son, Or at least the man who had once been the boy trailing after me on job sites, eager to carry my toolbox, eager to learn. His eyes flickered with something: hesitation, fear, maybe even shame. But then Carla squeezed his hand under the table and his jaw tightened. He nodded. "Dad, it's for the best." Michael shifted uncomfortably, then whispered, "Maybe we should slow down." But Carla's glare cut him into silence. Ethan finally looked up from his phone and scoffed. "Why are we dragging this out? He's old. He doesn't need all this money. Just sign it so we can move on." The words stung, but they also hardened my resolve. My grandson saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his easy life. My son saw me as a burden, and my daughter-in-law saw me as prey. But none of them saw the truth. None of them knew what I had prepared. I leaned forward, folding my hands. "Before I sign anything," I said quietly, "I want to tell you a story." Carla rolled her eyes. "Samuel, we don't have time." I raised my hand, cutting her off. "You will listen, because this story is about you." The room stilled. Richard shifted, uneasy. Michael glanced at me, his brow furrowed. Ethan sighed loudly, muttering something about wasting time. But Carla's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering there. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the recorder, and set it gently on the table. Its small red light glowed faintly. Carla's smile faltered. "What is that?" she demanded. I pressed play. The room filled with voices. Not mine, not from today, but from 2 nights earlier. Clear, undeniable, and sharp as knives. Carla's voice rang out first, every syllable cold and calculating. "He's almost ready to fold. He scribbled on the paper last night. Soon he'll be too tired to resist. Once we file this, it's done." Richard's voice followed, hesitant, weak. "Maybe it's too soon. He just lost Mom." Then Carla again, venomous and impatient. "Exactly. He's weak. This is the moment to strike. If we wait, he might get help. He might change the will." The words echoed in the silence of the dining room, bouncing off the polished wood, searing into the walls. My family froze. Richard's face drained of color. Michael's mouth fell open. Ethan sat upright, his phone forgotten. And Carla's composure cracked. Her eyes widened, her breath quickened, her hands trembled against the table. I pressed pause. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. I leaned back, watching their faces. "You plotted against me in my own house," I said, my voice calm, steady. "You thought I was too old, too broken to notice. But I have ears, and I have memory, and now I have proof." Carla's mask shattered. Her voice rose, shrill with panic. You manipulated this. You planted those words. It's fake." I pressed play again. More voices spilled into the room. Richard's voice, weary. "Maybe it's not right. He's still our father." Carla's reply, sharp and merciless. "He's not a father anymore. He's just a liability. The sooner we get rid of him, the sooner this company, this house, this money belongs to us." I stopped the recording. The silence roared louder than any scream. Richard buried his face in his hands. Michael looked between us, horror dawning in his eyes. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, finally realizing the gravity of what had been unleashed. Carla, though, refused to surrender. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice venomous. "So what? So you recorded a private conversation? That doesn't change reality. You are old. You are unfit. You're paranoid, delusional. This doesn't matter." I leaned forward, my eyes locking on hers. "It matters more than you can comprehend, because it reveals the truth of who you are, and the truth is poison to liars like you." For the first time, Richard looked at me, not as a predator, not as a conspirator, but as a son who had been caught in a web he was too weak to resist. His lips parted, but no words came. Michael whispered, "Dad, I didn't know it was this bad." His voice trembled with shame. Carla tried again, her voice breaking under the weight of desperation. "No one will believe this. No one will take your word over mine. You're senile. You're grieving. This means nothing." But even as she spat those words, she knew they rang hollow, because the recording was real. The words were hers. The betrayal was undeniable, and I was no longer the weak old man she thought she could control. I stood slowly, deliberately, my chair scraping against the floor with finality. The recorder still glowed red on the table, its tiny light burning like a torch in the darkness of their greed. "This is only the beginning," I said quietly. "You wanted me to sign away my life. Instead, you signed your own fate." The room erupted, Richard stammering excuses, Michael begging for calm, Ethan demanding to know what would happen to him. Carla's shrill voice cut through them all, screaming about lies, about betrayal. But I no longer heard them as family. I heard them as thieves unmasked, and for the first time in days, I felt peace. Because I had turned their own weapons against them. This was no longer their game, it was mine, and they were already losing. The confrontation came faster than even I expected. Carla's shrieks echoed down the hallway, drawing the rest of the family into the dining room like moths to flame. Cousins, in-laws, even a few close board members who had come by at Carla's invitation to witness the signing now crowded the doorway. Their curious eyes wide, their whispers hissing like snakes. Exactly as I had hoped. The more witnesses, the heavier the shame that was about to fall. Carla tried to regain her poise. She smoothed her hair, adjusted her blouse, and jabbed her finger at me as if scolding a child. "He's delusional," she hissed to the room. "He's fabricating things, twisting words. He's trying to destroy this family because he can't accept that his time is over." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I reached down, pressed play again, and let her own voice fill the room. "He's not a father anymore. He's just a liability. The sooner we get rid of him, the sooner this company, this house, this money belongs to us." The gasps around the table were sharp, slicing through her denial. A cousin dropped his glass, the shatter punctuating her downfall. A board member muttered, "Good God." Richard's face crumpled as though the words were a mirror he could no longer turn away from. Michael pushed his chair back, his voice trembling. "You said it, Carla. Don't you dare deny it." For a moment, Carla's mask broke completely. Fury distorted her face, veins bulging in her neck. Then, just as quickly, she pasted on a brittle smile, desperate, wild. "Out of context, that's all it is. You all know how he manipulates, how he's always been controlling, paranoid." But she wasn't in control anymore. I rose slowly from my chair, each movement deliberate, cinematic in its finality. My shadow stretched across the table, falling over the stack of unsigned papers. "You called me senile," I said, my voice low, steady, resonant. "You called me weak. You thought you could bury me while my wife's grave was still fresh. But it's not me who's finished. It's you." The room vibrated with tension. Carla's chest heaved, her eyes darting between the horrified witnesses. Richard finally broke. His chair screeched as he pushed away from the table. I didn't mean for it to go this far," he stammered. His hands shook. His eyes searched mine like a boy caught stealing from his father's wallet. "Dad, I swear, Carla said." I cut him off with a single look. The betrayal was already carved into stone. Nothing he said could erase it. Ethan slammed his palm on the table, his young arrogance unraveling into panic. "So what? So he's got some stupid recording? We can still fight this. We've got lawyers." That was when I turned to the doorway, and as if the world itself had been waiting, my attorney Jameson stepped forward. He carried a thick leather folder under one arm, his presence calm, commanding. The room hushed instantly. He set the folder on the table with a heavy thud that silenced even Carla's fury. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, bowing his head respectfully toward me before glancing at the others, "and all present. I was asked to be here today for one purpose, to confirm the legality of certain matters regarding the Whitaker estate." He opened the folder with slow precision, pulling out a document sealed with the familiar mark of my late wife's signature. "This is the updated will and testament of Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker, executed 8 months ago. In full soundness of mind." Carla froze. Her lips parted soundlessly. Richard blinked as though he had been struck. The witnesses leaned forward, murmurs growing louder. Jameson adjusted his glasses, his voice clear and deliberate. "It stipulates that in the event Mr. Samuel Whitaker should be declared unfit to manage his affairs, an event which has not occurred and which, based on medical certification, is not imminent, all holdings shall not pass to guardianship of any relative by marriage. Instead, they are to remain under the sole authority of Mr. Whitaker until such time as he himself designates." The silence was electric. Then Jameson placed the second page down. Furthermore, should any attempt be made to coerce, defraud, or manipulate him into relinquishing control, those parties shall be disinherited permanently, with all claims nullified. A gasp ran through the room like a ripple through water. Carla staggered back as though she'd been physically struck. Richard collapsed into his chair, his face pale, sweat breaking across his forehead. Ethan muttered a curse, his bravado crumbling. Michael closed his eyes, relief and shame mingling together. I straightened, my voice ringing with finality. You tried to rob me of my dignity. You tried to strip me of my life's work. Instead, you've stripped yourselves of your place in this family. Effective today, you have no claim, not to the company, not to the house, not to my name. The room erupted, shouts, protests, disbelief. Carla lunged for the documents, but Jameson snapped them away with the reflex of a man who had seen desperation before. Two security men, waiting outside at my quiet request, stepped into the room. Their presence was a steel wall, cold and unyielding. Carla froze mid-stride, her hands curling into fists. She turned on me one last time, her voice a venomous scream. You think you've won? You think anyone will believe a doddering old man? I'll ruin you. I'll drag your name through the mud until there's nothing left. I stepped toward her, my eyes level with hers, my voice a blade cutting through her rage. You already ruined yourself, Carla. The world just heard you admit it. She faltered. For the first time since she had married into my family, she looked small, cornered, defeated. Richard buried his face in his hands. Ethan slumped back in his chair, muttering bitterly under his breath. Michael, though silent, lifted his head just enough to meet my gaze, a flicker of hope in his eyes. The witnesses began to murmur louder, board members whispering about scandal, cousins shaking their heads in disbelief, some even pulling out their phones, capturing what was now undeniable. The humiliation was no longer private. It was public, permanent, and I stood at the center of it all, not broken, not senile, but unshaken. The old man they had mocked had become their executioner, not with fists or fury, but with truth, law, and the quiet dignity they had mistaken for weakness. I turned back to Jameson, my voice steady. Make it official. He nodded, closing the folder with a decisive snap. It already is. Carla collapsed into her chair, her head in her hands, the fight draining out of her like poison leaving a wound. Richard whispered apologies no one wanted to hear. Ethan's eyes darted toward the door, already planning his escape. Michael finally rose, slowly, as though the weight of silence had been lifted from his shoulders. The climax was over. The empire had not fallen. It had been defended. And for the first time since my wife's passing, I felt her presence beside me, her steady hand on my shoulder, whispering that I had done exactly what she would have wanted. The room emptied slowly. Like a battlefield, after the guns go silent, the witnesses left in murmurs, their faces pale with shock, some whispering into phones, others shaking their heads at the spectacle of greed laid bare. The board members slipped away, already calculating how to distance themselves from the scandal that would soon break across every whispering corner of our town. Only my family, what remained of it, stayed behind, fractured and silent. Carla sat frozen, her manicured nails digging into the polished wood of the table. The predator who once strutted with confidence now looked cornered, diminished. Richard was slumped beside her, shoulders shaking, muttering apologies into his palms, apologies too weak to bridge the chasm he had dug with his own betrayal. Ethan had already vanished, slipping out like a thief in the night the moment the last witness turned their back. Michael alone lingered, his eyes lowered, his posture hesitant, as though caught between shame and a desperate desire to remain my son. I stood at the head of the table, tall, steady, stronger than I had felt in years. The silence was not heavy anymore. It was clean, sharp, filled with the echo of truth finally spoken. I looked at them one by one, and then I said the words I had been holding inside since the day I buried my wife. This is my house. This is my name. And from this day forward, no one will steal it from me. Carla snapped her head up, her eyes flashing one last spark of defiance. You can't cut me out. I am your family now. Richard is your blood. You can't erase us. I stepped closer, my voice cold as steel. Family is loyalty. Family is respect. You showed me neither. Richard may share my blood, but you... I let the words hang in the air, then dropped them like a hammer. You are nothing. Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth to strike back, but no words came. For the first time, she had nothing left. Richard lifted his face, tears streaking down his cheeks. Dad, please. I don't know what I was thinking. I cut him off with a raised hand. You let her, yes. You let her turn you against me, against your own mother's memory. And now you want forgiveness? That is not mine to give. That belongs to the woman whose grave is still fresh in the ground. You betrayed her more than you betrayed me. His sobs deepened. He reached across the table as if to touch me, but I stepped back. There are wounds that words cannot heal, and this was one of them. Michael finally found his voice. Dad, he said softly, his voice trembling, I should have spoken sooner. I should have defended you. He paused, shame flooding his face. But I was scared of them, scared of losing what little I had. I see now that silence is its own betrayal. I looked at him, long and hard. Unlike Richard, there was no malice in his betrayal, only weakness. And weakness, unlike greed, can be mended. Then start now, I said. Stand up, Michael. Stand with me, not behind me. He rose slowly to his feet, his eyes glistening, and nodded. It wasn't absolution, not yet, but it was a first step. Carla pushed back her chair with a screech, her fury snapping back for one final strike. You think you've won, old man? You think this is over? You've humiliated me in front of everyone. I'll drag this to court. I'll smear your name in the papers. I'll make sure you die alone in this rotten house. I didn't flinch. I simply turned to the doorway. At my signal, the security men reappeared, their presence undeniable. Escort her out, I ordered quietly. Her protests filled the room, venomous, desperate, shrill. She clawed at Richard's sleeve, screaming for him to do something, to save her. But he remained slumped, broken. She called me every vile name she could summon. But her voice grew fainter as the guards led her away. The slam of the door behind her was not an end. It was a cleansing. Richard sat hollow, unable to rise, unable to look at me. Dad, he whispered again, but the word died in the air. He was no longer my son in that moment, not truly. He was just a man who had lost himself to greed, and I could not bring him back. I turned away from him. I had no more words to waste. The room was mine again. My wife's portrait gazed down from the wall, her eyes warm, her smile faint, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. I whispered silently to her, "It's done. They cannot touch us now." Later that night, after the house had fallen quiet, I walked into my study, lit only by the lamp on my desk. The documents lay neatly stacked, untouched by greedy hands. I placed the recorder beside them, its tiny red light finely dim, its work complete. Then I sat in my chair, the same chair where my wife had once read to me, where we had planned our lives together, and I let the weight of it all wash over me. I was tired, yes, but it was not the exhaustion of defeat. It was the weariness of a man who had fought and won, a man who had defended not just his fortune, but his dignity. Michael knocked softly on the door and stepped inside. He stood awkwardly, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered. "Dad," he said, his voice raw, "if you'll let me, I want to help. Not with money, not with power. I want to be your son again." I studied him for a long moment. In his eyes I saw not greed, not entitlement, but humility, regret, and perhaps the seed of redemption. "Then be a man worthy of your mother's memory," I told him. "Stand tall, earn back the family name." He nodded, tears streaming freely now. For the first time, I opened my arms, and he stepped forward, hugging me like a child. For the first time since Eleanor's death, I did not feel alone. The company was safe, the house was safe, but more importantly, the legacy was safe. Not because of documents or money, but because dignity had been defended, betrayal had been unmasked. The old man they thought broken had proven that age does not mean weakness. That wisdom is sharper than any knife. That justice, though delayed, still has teeth. When I finally stood at the window that overlooked the city I helped build, I saw not skyscrapers or bridges or streets. I saw the reflection of an old man who refused to bow. And beside me, in memory and spirit, I saw my wife. Her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, her smile whispering that I had done right. To anyone who hears my story, know this. Wealth can be stolen, property can be signed away, but dignity is yours until the day you let go. And if you refuse to let go, if you fight with truth, with patience, with cunning, then no one, not even your own blood, can strip it from you. That is my legacy. That is what I will leave behind.